So today I want to welcome to you all to the private investor meeting featuring Alphyn Biologics and Neil Kohler. We're glad that you could all make it. Just a couple of notes about the meeting today. We're going to have a presentation from Neil, which is going to be about 25 to 30 minutes. And then following that, there'll be a Q&A session. If you have any questions at all during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. Or if you would rather unmute and ask yourself after the presentation, you can do that as well. We will be recording the meeting, so if you would like to watch it again afterwards or have to leave early for any reason, we'll make sure that everyone has the recording to this meeting. And like I said, feel free to put those questions in the chat for Q&A afterwards, but we will go ahead and get started. So to talk about Alphyn Biologics, I would like to introduce Chairman of the Board of Directors and CEO, Neil Kohler. I'll turn it over to you, Neil.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. This morning, I'm going to tell you about the largest dermatological problem in the world, maybe the largest therapeutic problem in the world, and how the first drug in our pipeline of drugs is poised to dominate that market. I'll tell you a little bit about the company, and I'll tell you about the terrific near-term return opportunity we have. Imagine this is your little girl. On the left, you can see all that redness on her face. That's the largest dermatology problem in the world, called atopic dermatitis. You may know it better as eczema. And all of that redness is after 11 months of standard treatments. The atopic dermatitis hasn't gone away. So imagine she's up all night itching. We know this. It was embarrassed to go out during the day. And on the right side, you can see the atopic dermatitis, all that redness is gone and resolved. And this is after just 17 days of treatment with our Alphyn drug. This is what we're doing every day in our clinical trials, and this is what we would bring to the market. So how big is the world's largest dermatology problem? The National Eczema Society reports 10% of the population is affected. That's 800 million people potentially with the disease. Huge patient population. All the drugs that are out there today, either approved or in the clinical trial pipeline, only treat the inflammation component of the disease, whereas the Alphyn treats directly the inflammation component plus the staph-caused inflammation. Staph is bacteria, the infected atopic dermatitis skin, and maybe most importantly, we directly treat the itch. How big is the market? Well, today the market is a steroid market. Very, very, very high unit volume, very, very low pricing, $20, $30 a tube. But it's still a huge market at $7 billion. Most market reports have the market going to $35 billion. But there are two drugs recently approved. You may know them. Opzelura is already, after the 8th quarter of sales, annualized at $368 million. And the one you've probably seen on television all the time, Dupixent, is reported by Sanofi this year in their 5th year of sales to do $7 billion in revenue just in atopic dermatitis. When we look at their sell prices and their market shares are still well below 1%. That gets us to our market forecast. We use 88 million of that 800 million patient population, and we get ourselves to 118 billion as a revenue opportunity. Huge market opportunity. And when you'll see in a little bit, our clinical trial results are much better than these other drugs. This breaks a $118 billion market into the key markets where we can get paid for our drug product. We have factored into each of these regional markets access to healthcare and the sell prices for the drugs in these other markets. As you know, for instance, the US is the highest priced. In Japan, we've factored it back about 10 times. Important in this slide for potential investors and for our stockholders, each one of these large markets is a multi-billion-dollar market. It's a multi-billion-dollar market that drives a strong liquidity event return for investors. And what could that look like? We think with our current fundraise, the current Series B financing, we will be ready for a liquidity event in about 18 months. The 3 liquidity event deals on the right in this slide are all over $1 billion back to stockholders, and all are at the phase 2 completion, of the completion of the phase 2 clinical trial, or as you see on the right from J&J, preclinical. We will be exactly at the phase 2 complete clinical trial level at the end of this raise in 18 months. And so what could that mean for an investment in our Series B financing right now? Well, if we did in that previous slide, the Sanofi Chemo deal, Sanofi acquired Chemo, would be a 25x return, we hope 18 months from now. If we did an Amgen Kyowa Kirin deal, Amgen licensed the Kyowa Kirin drug worldwide, except for Japan, Kyowa Kirin kept their home country, would be a 22x return on our Series B financing. And if we did the J&J deal, J&J bought Biologics, that would be a 20x return on an investment in our current Series B financing. So I can't underline enough, we are not the typical biopharmaceutical drug investment right now. We are very close to a liquidity event inflection point, and that inflection point based on market comparables, as you can see, very, very high return potential. So why did we choose atopic dermatitis, in addition to the fact that it's such a large market? First, because the current drugs just don't work so well. 60+% of adults still complain their itch is severe. 55% complain that their disease is still not adequately controlled. And importantly, there's an 8.3-year lifespan reduction for patients hospitalized with the bacteria component of atopic dermatitis. When we look at the individual drugs, both legacy and current, they fall short on efficacy, as you'll see. None of those drugs treat the bacteria component, so none of them directly impact this potential reduction in lifespan. And none of these drugs, as you'll see, are worry-free for long-term continuous use. Atopic dermatitis usually presents as a child, as an infant, and it goes and it comes back and it goes and it comes back through a lifetime. So it's a lifelong disease that needs long-term continuous use. Not one today shows the worry-free potential that our drug has shown in our early clinical trials. So what is our drug? Our drug is plant-based. As a plant-based drug, it has multiple bioactive compounds, therefore it has multiple mechanisms of action. This by itself makes it very, very different from standard drugs, which are usually one compound, one mechanism of action, one way to treat a disease. We can treat a disease multiple ways. We have a very strong safety, side effect, and patient tolerability profile. You'll see the benefits of that shortly. And we have a much faster, less expensive regulatory approval path than a standard drug. To highlight that much faster approval path, we closed our first round of funding March of 2022, and within 3 years, we had completed our phase 2 clinical trial program, phase 2A, 2 smaller trials, with only $9 million. That's just unheard of in the drug world. Multiple mechanisms of action. This is what makes our drug very unique. We have multiple mechanisms, because of those multiple bioactives, to directly treat the inflammation problem of atopic dermatitis. We have multiple mechanisms of action to directly treat the itch problem of atopic dermatitis. And we have multiple mechanisms of action to directly treat the bacteria problem of atopic dermatitis. Remember, the competitive drugs only target that top line with one mechanism, not multiple mechanisms. So what are our clinical trial results? First, the phase 1 clinical trial is usually the first trial you do. That's a safety trial, and we had a waiver to do the safety trial because our safety is so strong. And we were allowed to start our phase 2 trial program at age 2, which is almost unheard of. Mostly, you usually have to start your first in human trial with adults, prove it works nicely in adults and safely in adults, and then move to age 2. Because of our safety, we started at age 2. We did 2 trials, which is a standard atopic dermatitis trial that the other drugs do, which means patients do not have their atopic dermatitis skin infected. So it's non-infected skin atopic dermatitis. Our trial was a proof of concept trial. It had key limitations. It was only 4 weeks. Most of the other AD trials, AD short for atopic dermatitis, does 8, 12, and 16-week trials. We had 78% mild atopic dermatitis, very, very difficult to show an improvement due to a drug when the disease is just not very severe, 78% mild. Also very difficult to show improvement from a drug when you only use it for 4 weeks, when you really need to use it for 8 or 12 or 16 weeks to show effect. And we only did 40 patients. The statisticians told us there's no chance we would get to statistical significance. Maybe we would see a trend. So we did a difficult trial, but we just wanted to do proof of concept and see what would happen. And lo and behold, one, we met every endpoint, and the top endpoint of itch and that 4th endpoint of IGA, we hit statistical significance. So a very, very great result in the standard atopic dermatitis trial. Then we went on to do something very different. We did a trial. Well, these are the results, just to show you a little bit of a difference. Our drug and our vehicle, if you look across, the drug numbers are much, much higher than the vehicle numbers, and that's what gets us statistical significance. So those are the key endpoints and the key results from that trial. And then we went on to do a phase 2 clinical trial, small trial again, where the atopic dermatitis skin started as infected. This is a much greater challenge for an atopic dermatitis drug, a challenge the other drugs didn't do because they don't have mechanisms to treat the bacteria component. And the results were really quite something. We divided the endpoints into urgency to treat, top priorities, the critical priorities, the standard priorities. These are the same endpoints you saw previously, the standard endpoints that we test to. These are the key drugs to the left in gray. The top 4 in gray are the topicals. The bottom 4 are the systemics, because everybody asks, how do you compare it to the other drugs? And what we found here, there'll be a lot of numbers. Just focus on the dark green where we were the best. And as you can see, when you get to side effects, look at all the problems those other drugs have. It really points to that center column. We look to be the only drug that would be worry-free for long-term continuous use, treating the top priorities. The critical priority is the bacteria component. And there are 2 components there. One is infection, and 2 is bacteria cause the inflammation of atopic dermatitis. The other drugs just don't treat it, and we had a terrific result here. The standard area over here on the right is what the other drugs mostly focus on. As you can see, all the dark greens, we were the best. All the light greens, we are very close to the best. And this is an overall picture that our dermatologist advisors tell us makes us, in their minds, the topical drug of choice for atopic dermatitis, drug of choice in this huge market. If I summarize the results, we seem to, so far, to have the best safety, side effect, patient tolerability profile by far. Seems we're best at the most important treatment area for atopic dermatitis, which is itch. Best at reducing itch. We seem to be, so far, the only drug that targets the bacteria component, which takes care of the infection and takes care of the key cause of the inflammation, bacteria. And in this trial, we get a number of questions around how does it perform in Asians versus Caucasians. 50% were Asian. We had a very nice result, and so that really opens up the Japanese, Chinese, South Korean markets, for example, for us. And since the biggest patient population that has a problem with atopic dermatitis is the pediatric population. Half of our patients were pediatric population, and those results were equivalent. So we did really well in these key subgroups. With the help of our our dermatologists, we've put together this slide that shows they and we think where we stand in the market. The first and only drug at the moment, worry-free for long-term continuous use, and the first and only drug for the moment that we know of that directly treats the itch, directly treats the bacteria, directly treats the inflammation. This is really how we position to be drug of choice in our minds, in our dermatologists' minds. This is a quote from one of the patients in our phase 2A trial. I'll go to that darker gray rectangle. Nothing has managed to produce the normal skin like she had in the trial. We had a number of these emails from either the moms of a patient or the patient themselves trying to get more drug or trying to get into the next clinical trial. Very, very nice result. Our second drug is for a disease called epidermolysis bullosa. It's an orphan disease, which means it has, in the US, 200,000 or fewer sufferers. And as a result, it gets a special designation from FDA, which gets it a faster approval path. It gets us extra regulatory exclusivity from date of approval, and it gets us a much higher sell price than normal drugs. That epidermolysis bullosa, we peg at about a $5.7 billion global opportunity. So this drug by itself has got exit potential that's very, very strong. There's no cure today. The disease in layman's terms, the way I explain it is the skin layers, genetic reasons, don't stick together. And as you can see, this little girl on the right, they are bandaged from head to toe. It starts at birth. Just the slightest brush of your arm or your leg or your belly on your own skin will open up a wound. Our Alphyn mechanisms that I showed you earlier all focus on treating the key symptoms. And we think we have a really, really nice opportunity in this market. Our management team, my background, half of career in large pharma, large device within the Wyeth system. Over my career, I somehow became the guy to get all the early stage divisions that we acquired. And in the end, the last division that we acquired, we ended up selling. And instead of going on to Kendall, another large company, I took leave of my large pharma, large device experience, and I've been an early stage CEO ever since. Alphyn is my 6th early stage life science company. The last one I exited at a 16x return on investment. Our president, Stephen Pentelmick, is a longtime Procter & Gamble executive. He knows skincare. He was very, very involved in their global beauty care business. And importantly, he ran their billion-dollar early stage portfolio. So he knows large company requirement and small company need. The key to bringing us all together is our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Pico. His first big project out of his PhD program was he brought the first topical antibiotic through development, through FDA approval, and into the market. That drug is called Bactroban. It is still today the go-to drug to treat the drug-resistant MRSA bacteria infection or MRSA infection. I met him in mid-career when he was, we had his own company where he was either VP regulatory, VP clinical trial, VP R&D for early stage life science companies. This is the 4th company he and I have worked together on, the first one where he's a founder. And then at the end of that experience in his own company, he was actually recruited over to be the lead clinical trial protocol writer for Merck's blockbuster Keytruda. So there's nobody better than Gary that I've met in working with FDA. Excellent, excellent, excellent. We have a full cadre of advisors for FDA in Europe, for EMA in Japan, for PMDA. We have a full cadre of science and industry advisors, and we have leading dermatologists we work with around the world, in particular the key markets, US, Europe, Australia, and Japan. We're working hard to be a virtual company, and so far we haven't had to open an office, we haven't had to open an R&D facility, we haven't had to open a manufacturing facility. We're able to work with the leading contract manufacturers, contract testing labs around the world, so we have a full cadre of operational teams, but we haven't had to spend money on brick and mortar, which has been very, very helpful. One of the ways in which we've been able to get so far with just a little bit of money. We have 4 key market protections. We have our first patent has just gotten a claims allowance, and that'll take us to patent protection through 2042. We expect we will get regulatory exclusivity for our first drug in the US, 10 years regulatory exclusivity from FDA on the date of approval, starting on the date of approval. 8 years in the US and Japan. For the US, because our drug substance is plant-based, there is no generic drug approval path. If you want to do what we're doing, you have to do clinical trials. And so by definition, that eliminates the generic companies. And we believe we have a raw material supply advance protection of at least 15 years. More on that in a second, like right now. Our drug is plant-based. We have started our own supply chain that is regulatory compliant, FDA and other health authorities, and that will be large enough to supply this huge atopic dermatitis market. Once we get the raw material from the plant, it is standard pharmaceutical manufacturing in a standard manufacturing plant. When we talk to strategics, the folks who would either license or buy us, they have 2 key questions. First question is, does it work? We show them the clinical data, they're very intrigued, the clinical data I just showed you. But then the next question is, well, if your drug is plant-based, how could you possibly have enough supply at the right quality to satisfy this large market? So this is what we've done, and this has been an absolutely satisfactory answer to large pharma so far. In 2022, we started planting our own plants in compliance with FDA and health authority regulations around the world. The planting season is right now. By the end of 2024, so in another 2 months, we will have 1.4 million units planted and in the ground available commercially. We have enough funding already available to get a total of 2.6 million 60-gram units available for market by the end of 2025. And the plan is to have enough plants in the ground by 2028. We expect approval in 2029 to be able to supply 9.2 million units of 60-gram tubes. You might say that's nice, but what does that really mean financially? Well, what that means is right now, by the end of this year, we will have enough drug supply available to supply $2.7 billion worth of product at market value. By the end of next year, we will have enough plant in the ground to supply $5.1 billion of product in the market. And by 2028, we should have $18.2 billion of market value product. That supplies the atopic dermatitis market quite nicely. And this plan is a plan that so far has satisfied the strategics that we've talked to. We've done 3 independent third-party market research studies, 2 with dermatologists. Those 2 confirmed our clinical results are strong. They've confirmed that there is a need to directly target the itch, directly target the bacteria, directly target the inflammation. We're the only drug to do that, and they confirm there's a need for that. maybe the most important is what we hear is there's a huge need to have a worry-free, long-term continuous use drug. And so far as we see it today, we are the first and the only at the moment to satisfy that requirement. We've talked to the US insurers. We talked to 6 insurers in the US, and they've looked at our results and said they would expect to give us a high reimbursement rate. That high rate, to put it into a number right now, is about $2,000 for the 60-gram tube. And they would expect to give us priority approval over the other drugs out there because we directly target itch and bacteria that the other drugs don't, and because of the safety profile. So we had a nice input from insurers on the opportunity to get reimbursement. We're getting to summary here. In the summary, our Alphyn hydrogel drug for atopic dermatitis fills a huge market gap, fills several huge market gaps. First, it fills the market gap in patient population type. 70% of the market is mild to moderate atopic dermatitis. That's exactly where we are, so we fill that gap very, very nicely. 90% of the market is topical, and that's where we are, so we fill that gap very nicely. None of the market is really worry-free for long-term continuous use. We feel like we fill that gap. That's the biggest one we think that we fill. And if the insurers stick with what they told us, patient access to our drug should be no problem. We should be reimbursed, and we should be reimbursed first at second tier. So patient access is looking very, very good, and we fill that gap. We're currently raising our Series B financing. As I've mentioned, we've raised to our Series A round $9 million. This Series B is an $18 million raise. $7 million is in the bank already. I already know we've got another $1 million at least soft circled. There are 4 key milestones to this financing. All 4 can drive in a liquidity event. 2 of those 4 are already funded, so we've got 2 under our belt and 2 to go. We have a lead investor. They have a data room. We have a data room. All of that's available to you. And as you recall, with this Series B financing, based on its pre-money, the multiples that I put up are 25x, 22x, 20x, if we're good enough to get the same sorts of deals that the other 3 atopic dermatitis drug companies got. And if I just do a simple summary of where we think we are, we think based on what we see, we show commercial superiority for both partner and investor return. That commercial superiority is based on the clinical trial results, based on the availability of FDA-compliant drug substance. We think we're significantly de-risked as a result. Our data points to the drug of choice for this huge market. The insurers have already told us they would expect to reimburse us at this high market price of $2,000 per 60-gram tube. Our market protections, 4 strong market protections that stand by themselves, are not dependent on each other. The management team has done it before, and I think with that, I'm going to conclude and see if we have any questions.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Neil. We did have a few questions come in. So the first one is, how far along are you in negotiation with the potential acquirers that you discussed?
We, as soon as we started to get clinical data, which is about 18 months ago, we had early clinical data, we began talking to strategics. We have 6 or 7 or 8, I need to count them to refresh myself, that we are currently in discussion with who have great interest. One is in the middle of due diligence. I can tell you, mostly what we're hearing is the clinical results that we have are for a total of 60 patients. And everybody is very intrigued with those clinical results, but most of them are waiting to see the results from our next set of clinical trials, which is what we're raising money for right now, which will be about 200 patients. And that's where those other drug companies did their exit deals, at 200 patients. So I'd have to say I wouldn't rule out any sort of exit deal before we finish this next round of clinical trials. As I said, there's one in the middle of their diligence right now, but I think we're nicely set up. Once we complete this Series B financing and complete the milestones, we should be in pretty good shape to push a number of companies along. Maybe that answers your
wonderful.
question.
Yeah, and if that person has a follow-up, feel free to ask it as well. Next question is, what is your current burn rate and current reserves pre-Series B raise, and what is the expected use of Series B funds?
So I'm going to go, if I can, back for a minute. 4 key use of Series B funds. One is to complete the atopic dermatitis AD infected skin trial. That's number 1. 2 is to complete planting of a total of 50,000 plants. That'll give us about another $4.4 billion worth of drug product at market value. So planting another 50,000 plants, that's number 2. Both of those are funded. Number 3 is to complete the clinical trial, phase 2B trial for non-infected atopic dermatitis skin. And 4, to complete the formulation and complete a phase 2 trial in epidermolysis bullosa. So at the end of this raise, we should have 2 drug assets that are in their first opportunity for exit transaction, end of phase 2 clinical trial. The base burn rate for the company is about $160,000 a month, and that's really because we just don't have any infrastructure we're funding. So the big numbers will ramp up as we ramp up production for the clinical trials and we do the clinical trial work itself. And at the moment, I think we have, maybe it was in there, I think at the moment we have about 5.5 million. I wish we had 5.5 billion, 5.5 million in the bank.
Okay, sounds good. Have you seen any publications on the plant in question from any institutions or academics?
The raw material from this plant has been used by indigenous populations for hundreds and hundreds of years. There are many publications. I would say that they're not New England Journal of Medicine or Lancet level publications, but many very good peer-reviewed second-level publications around the liquid right from the plant. That's one of the ways in which we've been able to move much faster through the regulatory process by using a lot of that published data as part of our safety and data package.
Okay. Next question is, how protected from infection like beetles or bugs or blight or bad weather, forest fires, natural disasters are these trees?
That's a good question. The trees themselves are pioneer trees. That definition means 2 things. It means that they're very, very hardy trees. They're very tough. They're very resistant themselves. And in fact, historically, there's about a 90% yield from planting to actually harvesting. And that time frame is 7 to 9 years for the plant to actually get to harvest, which is why we started planting back in 2022, thinking we'd be approved in 2029, 7 years later. So as a pioneer plant, they're very hardy. As a pioneer plant, they're the first to start to grow in any open area, no matter why the area is open, whether a farmer's cleared the land or there's been a flood or there's been a fire. So 90% historical yield, very tough, hardy plant, number 1. Number 2, your second question maybe gets to the growing region that we've chosen for this plant is roughly the size of 1/3 of the United States or 1/3 the size of Europe. We're now planting in 9 different locations and we've qualified all of those locations, 9 different locations, well separated geographically to spread the risk of, well, what if there is a fire in one location? Well, these other 8 locations are far enough away that they're unaffected by any local environmental problem.
Okay, got it. Is it possible that the active ingredient or ingredients can be identified and produced without the plant? And is that patentable?
So the answer to both of those questions is yes. The challenge to both of those questions is following that strategy will take us to a normal drug approval process and slow down our march towards an investor liquidity event to the normal 10, 12, 15-year drug approval cycle. So we looked at it. We have some options in order to go forward there. It's very expensive, so it's possible. But our goal was, let's start a company, let's get to liquidity events as fast as we can. And so planting these plants in their normal habitat absolutely is the fastest way forward. And is really, it really turns out not to be a supply problem. There is already, quote, a consumer business for this tree, and it's liquid, it's small, but we're taking what's normally done, we're ramping it up, we're protecting it, and we're owning it. So it's a much faster path. But yet the answer is yes to both of those questions. We could do that. Much more expensive, much longer path.
Okay, got it. Next question is, can you tell me more about your exit timeline and possible return on investment?
We think our exit timeline is about 18 to 24 months from now. The trigger to the exit is completion of these 2 phase 2 clinical trials. The atopic dermatitis phase 2B trial, we're doing 2 of them there. And that's independent of, but we should also be able to achieve a completion of a phase 2 trial in epidermolysis bullosa, 18 to 24 month time period. And as you remember from the slide that I put up previously, there are 3 recent exits in atopic dermatitis that happened at the completion of the phase 2 clinical trial program, where we will be in 18 to 24 months. So that's our timeline. And the time range is simply how fast or how slow the hospitals we engage will enroll the patients. So that's where your variable comes from in the 18 to 24 months. And if we're good enough as senior management in our negotiations, I mean, our starting point is, Sanofi acquired Amgen at a 25x return to investors. We have better data. J&J acquired Biologics at a 20x return to investors. We have better data. So our starting point is in that 20 to 25x return range, which translates into over $1 billion starting point, and hopefully we'll be good enough that we can get that sort of exit for our stockholders.
Okay, got it. Next question is, do the non-active ingredients have any other transient side effects?
We worked with the father of dermatology drug formulation in order to formulate our drug into it's a hydrogel vehicle, into the vehicle. Our goal was to have components that have as little effect on the skin as possible. And so far, what we're seeing is it is having as little effect on the skin as possible. So far, so good. No detrimental side effects, especially when we compare them to what we see with the other drugs. So our design goal was minimal effect We do see some. You always see some, especially in atopic dermatitis, because it's a very sensitive skin problem. But so far, compared to the other drugs, much, much better.
Okay, and going along with that actually is a question that says, can you expand on that differentiation you see your drug has compared to the other atopic dermatitis drugs?
So taking it in order of importance to the physician and to the patient, the most important is itch. The second most important is side effect. When we look at our results versus itch, we are twice as good at reducing the itch as Sanofi's Dupixent. Remember, Sanofi's Dupixent is an injectable. It is a $7 billion drug today. We are twice as good, rounding up. There, I have to go back and look at the slide. 35 or 37% reached the endpoint, and we were 68% reached the endpoint. We are 10 to 20% better. I have to go look and get the hard numbers. 20% better than the next closest topical in reaching the itch endpoint. And itch is the main reason that a patient gets to the doctor. Inflammation can be a problem. It can look really bad. It can be embarrassing, but they go to the doctor because they can't stand the itch. So we see significantly better results in the itch category. Number one priority. Now, this is, of course, from a much smaller total 60-patient clinical trial, which is why we're going to go off and do a larger phase 2b 200-patient trial. In the area of side effects, you may remember in that chart, every one of those drugs had some sort of significant side effect. For instance, I'll go to Dupixent again. 15% of Dupixent users have eye problems that are long-term. They resolve over time, but they have eye problems. Several of the topical, there are two other topicals on that list. Topical new atopic dermatitis problems actually cause contact dermatitis bacteria infection, where we directly treat the bacteria infection. So we see a big difference so far in our safety, side effect, patient tolerability performance versus the other drugs. And when the doctors look at the whole package that we have, immediately point to this area as the area that is most exciting for them, because patients may have some satisfaction with these other competitive drugs, but because of the side effects, the patients don't want to stay on them very long. So a second main reason they go back to the doctor after the itch problem is it's time to change drugs. I've been on this drug now for 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, and I don't want to be on it anymore. I want to change to something else. And the doctors right now, and we don't see the reason to change from our drug. You can start with our drug, and you can continue to use our drug. The data is pointing to that. We hope it stays that way.
Okay,
I think I covered that.
Yeah, that's great. And we have a few more questions. Is the hydrogel colorless?
Hydrogel itself is clear, yes.
Okay. What happens if you are unable to raise the balance funding? How does it delay and affect your strategy?
We have two key endpoints for an exit or a liquidity event already funded. So we're very excited that we can get to a point that the strategics have already told us they're looking for as we sit here right now. But how does it affect it? We had 4 key milestones. We only do 2, and those 2 are very capable of driving liquidity events.
Okay, got it. And what is the shelf life of the tube, considering it's expected to be expensive?
Well, it's expected to be expensive from a reimbursement revenue perspective for our eventual liquidity event company. but we anticipate, just to be clear, we anticipate a $5 and not more than a $10 production cost per tube. So there's a very, very nice margin there. We have a shelf life at this point of 2 years. Over the next 20 months, we're heading towards, and the goal is to have a shelf life of 3 years. But we've already shown 2. Goal is 3.
Okay, got it. How exactly are you building your drug supply, your drug supply?
We have contracted with expert growers in this 1/3 of the United States size geographic region. They either own the land or they lease the land. We're not in the land business. We are approving their leases. We're approving if we ever get to a land sale agreement where they want to sell their land, we have rights to approve and edit their land sale agreements so that we can control the fact that as long as we have a tree on the land, that land is solely dedicated to our tree. Contractually, we own the tree, and contractually, we own the liquid. Some of you may be familiar with DLA Piper. DLA Piper has got law offices in each of the countries we're operating in. We're working closely with our lawyers in country to manage all legal agreements. We have, as head of our supply chain team, a person who has already set up an identical supply chain with the identical tree for another company. And so that person has excellent connections and relationships into this region. And so we've developed very good connections. We've developed relationships with the national and local governments, and everything has been put together contractually under local law with the local DLA Piper attorneys. We own the trees. We don't own the land. We own the drug. We don't own the land.
Got it. Thank you. Can you tell me more about your patent applications? Because your drug is plant-based, what are the basis of your patent claims?
Good question. So you probably have already thought when I said there are many publications already out there on the raw material. We certainly had a challenge with our patent applications. And remember, we now have, we didn't start working on patent applications until 2020. So we're still really early in this process. And we do have one application now with claims allowed. When we first started the company, before we raised any money, because we had these multiple bioactive compounds, we wanted to meet with FDA and find out how FDA would regulate our drug, because if they regulated it a certain way, there was no company. And that certain way is if they regulated us as a multiple drug, compound drug entity, then just from a financial perspective, there was no way we could bring a multiple compound drug to market. Just doesn't work. Well, FDA told us they would regulate our entire liquid with all of those bioactives as a single drug, but they also told us exactly what we had to do on the manufacturing and testing side to get through regulatory approval. And this is getting to our patent applications. They wanted to see standard laboratory compound tests to show percentage quantity of key components that we would identify in the liquid. And they also wanted to see bioassays to prove that the percentages that we say are in specification actually performed in biological assays the way it's expected to perform. And so in running those laboratory tests and then running the bioassays, we found things that A, we didn't expect, that B, were not ever found before in the published literature, And therefore, C became the basis for our patent applications. And for the patent that we just had claims allowed, that's exactly what happened. So we have composition of matter claims that have been allowed. And in our other applications, we have composition of matter claims. And we have method of use claims that have been allowed in the current patent application that is about to publish, and in the patent applications going through prosecution. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that's great. We have about 7 minutes left, so we'll go through a few more questions that are in the chat. Are there any known side effects of the drug, and is there a process for detection?
Are there known side effects? The drug material itself has a very poor bioavailability. So it doesn't go through the skin easily. We do know of another drug, and we were able to use some of their data that starts with our raw material, but then they take a fraction out of that material and they turn it into an oral dose for diarrhea. We know from their data that it's not very orally available. So very little of the drug is available to the body for any sort of side effect or toxicity. We, in designing our hydrogel, designed it so that the drug would stay for atopic dermatitis on top of the skin, where the atopic dermatitis problems are. The AD problems are not very deep in the skin, they're on the surface. So we haven't seen published yet, significant side effects from the drug raw material. And I was hesitant, or I was pausing for a little bit because I didn't know quite where to start. What we have seen in our clinical trial so far is a small percentage, 1 to 5% of the patients have experienced the lowest level in the scale of sting, mild sting that was intermittent, transient, went away. And that's all we've seen so far.
Okay, got it.
I'll finish with that to say, based on everything we know, we don't expect to see systemic toxicity. We'll be testing for it again going forward. We don't expect to see it, but we'll test for it.
Okay, got it. And we have one more question that we will have be the final one. And if you have any follow-up questions for Neil, we can stay on for a few minutes, or you can set a follow-up meeting with him. The last question we have is, do you have any injections besides the tree content, and what preservatives are used or needed?
Can you start that one again? I didn't quite hear it.
Yeah, do you have any injections besides the tree content, and what preservatives are used or needed?
I don't know that I understand. Do you have any injections?
Yeah, injections is in quotes. So if there's anything that, or we can have that person clarify, but maybe you can go to the second question first, which is what preservatives are used or needed.
We're using 3 different preservatives, phenoxyethanol, ethanol, methylparaben, and another paraben. I have to look up to be sure. Very low concentration. While we have terrific antibacterial properties and we have terrific antiviral properties, we don't have great antifungal properties, and so we've got to preserve. We tried hard in our first formulations not to have preservatives. We didn't want to have them, but for fungal reasons, we've got three different preservatives. I forgot the third one, another paraben.
And that first person clarified by injections, they just meant additive. So it was, do you have any additive besides the tree content? So I believe you kind of answered that in that second question.
Yeah, preservatives, and they're just normal, normal hydrogel, water, glycerin, normal hydrogel compounds. I think there are only six compounds in the formulation itself, and then the drug makes 7. I'm close. If it's not 6, it's 5 or 8.
Okay, perfect. So I know we are about out of time. I did just put up a last investor poll just to gauge your interest in Alphyn Biologics. These will only be shared with Neil Kohler, the CEO. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out, we would greatly appreciate that so we can gauge your interest. But we do want to thank Neil for the presentation today, and I want to let everyone know that you will be getting a follow-up email from us, which will have the Zoom link recording to this meeting, and it will have the deck, and Neil Kohler will be on that email, so you can set up a follow-up meeting with him. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Neil. Otherwise, you'll be hearing from us. So thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to see you at another event soon.